Hello, my name is Mike, and we're not working on a bike. Not in this episode. In this episode, we're going to be working on my 1982 Ford Granada, which I affectionately call the Rusty Grenade. In this episode, I'm going to do something I've never actually done before. And what I'm going to do is, see, Rusty is the only vehicle that I have right now that doesn't have a working AC system. So I need to fix the air conditioner. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put refrigerant in. But what I meant by never done before is, I've never converted a system from R12 to R134A. So for those of you that aren't familiar, older cars use something called R12, dichloro-difluoromethane gas. And it turns out that, R12 was really harmful to the ozone in the atmosphere. So they changed the formulation sometime in the 80s or 90s to something called R134A, which is much less harmful to the environment. So both refrigerant gases work pretty much the same way, but kind of the main difference is that the lubricant or oil that circulates in the system with the refrigerant is very different. If I'm changing to 134A, I have to have 134A compatible oil, and I have to try to get all the old R12 oil out that I can. So this is PAG oil, which is compatible with R134A systems. We're going to put this in the car, and then we're going to evacuate as much of the old refrigerant and air in the system and moisture in the system out as we can. Anytime you work on an AC system, before you put fresh refrigerant in, you have to do what we call evacuate. And that just means putting a vacuum or suction on the system to draw everything out. And in the process of doing all of these AC repairs, we're going to boil water. What do I mean by boiling water? Stick around and find out.
Somewhere in a dusty, dirty back alley in western Arizona, not far from historic Route 66, is an old fart trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. He'll work on anything, just as long as it's got at least 2 cool wheels.
Now, when we go to remove the oil from the system, the areas where it tends to collect, it's going to be throughout the system, but main areas are the compressor itself will trap some oil, and then the accumulator will accumulate some oil. So we're going to remove those components, we're going to drain as much oil out of them as we can, and then we'll put the system back together, and hopefully the O-rings and seals and stuff are still good enough to hold pressure, or more importantly, hold a vacuum when we use the evacuation pump to draw the system down to a vacuum. I also have some adapters. These adapters are what we use so that we can use the R134A charging devices. They're quick disconnects. They screw on to where the old R12 ports are. I got 2 sets, so I can do another car later on. I only need 1 pair. But anyway, that's the plan. So, you may ask, what did I mean by boiling water? Now, a little while ago, I said something about boiling water. And what the heck does that have to do with AC, refrigeration systems? Well, here's the thing, guys. When we go to put refrigerant in a system, we've got to make sure that the system is completely free of any kind of contaminants, including ambient air or moisture. And there's moisture in the air. So we've got to get that moisture out, but the problem is the moisture or water is going to get trapped in various areas, and it's real hard to draw that water out just with the suction alone. So what we're doing with the vacuum when we evacuate the system is we're actually reducing the amount of pressure in that system. Now think about it. Go back to boiling water 101. When I boil water, what am I actually doing? I'm heating the water up to the point where the water changes from a liquid to a gas. Now at sea level, it requires 212 degrees Fahrenheit for it to boil. But as we go up in altitude, it requires less heat. Okay? So if I go to say 6,000 feet, come on pen, right, 6,000 feet, the water then boils at only 200 degrees. And if I take it to 10,000 feet, it boils at 194 degrees. Well, why is that? That's because at those elevations, the air pressure is less. There's less air forcing the water to stay in its liquid form. And so it requires less heat to convert it to a vapor. Everybody tracking so far? It has to do with air pressure more than it does altitude. So at sea level, we're at 14.7 psi. That's how much atmospheric pressure there is. When we reach 6,000 feet, that becomes, let me look at my notes. I'm cheating. I get to write it down because my memory isn't that good. Now it's only 11.9 psi. At 11.9 psi, it only requires 200 degrees to make that conversion to a vapor. And at 10,000 feet, it's only 10.4 psi. So why does all that matter? Well, here's the thing. If I want to get the water out of a system, it's much easier to get that moisture out if I turn it to a vapor. Water droplets, I'm not going to be able to get them out. They're going to be trapped in all the nooks and crannies and corners. But if I can boil that water and turn it into a vapor, I can suck it right out of the system and make it completely dry. So if we extrapolate all this, if we bring the pressure down to a much lower pressure by applying a vacuum, we can get the water to boil at room temperature. So what we're doing is, and we're not going to measure in psi now, we're going to measure in units of measurement for vacuum called inches of mercury. If we can get it down to around 25 inches of mercury, INHIG is inches of mercury. If we can get to 25 inches of mercury, then we can boil that water at room temperature of, say, 60 to 70 degrees. And right now it's 146, so it's well above that. I won't have any difficulty getting that water to turn into a vapor and get drawn out of the system. You didn't know you were going to boil water when you worked on that AC system, did you? Well, now you know. Hopefully that made sense. You guys tracking? Carl, did you get that? Yeah, okay. Carl says he's going to go climb a mountain and boil water. Far out. All right, so anyway, we'll get those parts pulled off, oil drained out. We'll put it all back together. We'll put a vacuum on it. Hopefully we won't have any leaks. We'll shove a bunch of R134A and PAG oil into it, and then we'll check it for leaks just to see if all this aged stuff is held up. System I didn't really talk about is something called an orifice tube, and basically what it does is it's a restriction in the system so that you have a high pressurized refrigerant fluid, and once it reaches that little orifice it now goes to an area of lower pressure, and when it does that it expands and becomes a gas again, and that's what makes it cold. So this is where the magic happens in your air conditioner. There's some kind of a restriction that separates the high pressure from the low pressure. So one of the things you want to do is you want to take this orifice tube out of here. You want to inspect it, make sure there's no debris accumulated in it. Otherwise, it'll block Freon from flowing through the system. We're going to see how much oil comes out of here so you have an idea of how much oil to put back in. I don't have a manual for this car, so I'd have to do a little online research to try to figure out how much oil to put back in it. But just for my own edification, I just want to see how much comes out. It may not be much. It may not be any. We'll find out. Come on, oil. Oh, that's not good. It's like zero oil coming out of this accumulator. There should be something in here. Wow. Let's see what our compressor has trapped in it. Come here, Mr. Compressor. So I think we need to go on the discharge side. Oh, God, this thing's heavy. Nothing. Holy moly. Not a drop. Oh, I'm not going to stand there and hold it. So that's, that doesn't make sense. So I'm going to do a little internet research and see how much oil is actually supposed to be in this system. There's a good chance that it may have had a refrigerant leak. And when the refrigerant leaks out, so does the oil. So that may be why there's nothing here. Previous owners may never have brought the oil level back up to where it's supposed to be. I'm going to see if I can find some replacement O-rings, because I don't trust these. And I could not get that orifice tube out of this line. It's supposed to slide out. It's held in by some small O-rings, and it can be kind of tough to get out, especially if this gets kinked or bent at all. Sometimes you got to drill them out. But there is a tool that's made to lock into it to help pull it out. I no longer have that tool because, well, I lost it. So I'm going to go to Harbor Freight, and I'm going to pick up the tool, and I'm going to pick up some O-rings, and we'll put this thing back together and see if it actually works. There it is. So this is that orifice tube that I talked about. Basically, it's like a little bit of a screen here on the plastic end, and in the middle here there's a little tiny brass, tiny little pinhole sized orifice that restricts the flow, so you have low pressure on one side, high pressure on the other side. And this one doesn't look too bad. The screen on here will collect some debris. I don't know if you can see the debris on there. Anyway, when I went to the Harbor Freight and the auto parts store, I did get a new one of these orifice tubes. Heck, they're only $3. Even a cheapskate like me can afford to buy a new orifice tube, and it's cheap insurance. I'll go ahead and put the new one in, and that way, once we get the system up and running, I don't have to worry about it plugging up. So now the question becomes, how much of this stuff do I put in? Now this is an 8-ounce container. Now according to my internet research, and I punched in 82 Mustang, because, well, this car is essentially a Mustang. They share, a 6-cylinder Mustang has exactly the same components as this car. So I figured that would give me some results. I looked up for capacity for refrigerant oil, and it would say capacity for Ford refrigerant oil. I would click on the link, it would bring up a chart of a 72 Subaru or 2014 Dodge Viper or some crap. The internet makes no sense at all. I mean, I specifically said 82 Mustang. Anyway, I digress, which I do a lot of. Close as I can figure from looking at some different charts, it takes anywhere from 4 ounces to 5 ounces. And this one was completely dry, so I'm not worried about having to displace any of the old oil that was in it. So basically we want to put roughly half this bottle in there. I don't want to put it all in the compressor because the compressor is designed to compress gas into a denser gas. It's not designed to compress fluid. You could actually damage the compressor by putting too much in it. So I'm going to put the bulk of it in the accumulator, and as the system pumps up, it'll distribute what it needs back into the compressor. I will put some in the compressor, just enough to lubricate it. Once it starts going, it will have some lubricant going on. So that's the plan. Cross your fingers. Hope I have a clue. I sure don't have a clue. Section side. Discharge side. And what I should do is, what I will do, rotate the pump a little bit. Swirl around in there. Lubricate. Yeah, actually this is going this way. Looks like about half. A little bit more. Okay. Put this crazy thing back together and boil the vapors out of it, and put some fresh refrigerant in it and see if it actually works. You know, this may actually be for naught. It could be a bad compressor, although it doesn't feel bad. Who knows? We'll find out. Well, it turns out that the high pressure fitting, the adapter, would not fit on the high pressure fitting side. And that's fine because, well, my gauge set is an older type, and as it is, I have adapters on there, so I can still connect it to the high pressure side. If this was a newer gauge and it didn't have adapters and all it had was the R134A connectors, I wouldn't be able to attach here. I don't really care as long as the low pressure size has the adapter, because that's where I need to put the R134A. But we still need the manifold on there so we can see how much pressure we have, and we want to be able to evacuate the system completely, so by tying in both sides we're drawing a vacuum on the entire system much more easily. So we'll go ahead and hook this up. I'm going to hook up my vacuum pump, which actually runs on air. It's a little strange. It uses positive airflow and a Venturi system to create a suction. So we'll get this hooked up, we'll get it evacuated, and we'll see if it actually holds a vacuum. If it holds a vacuum, that tells me that my seals are doing their job and that I don't have any kind of serious leaks. Why don't you go on there, stupid thing. Hiya! Now I know this apparatus is noisy as heck, But we are now applying a vacuum to our system. Let's see if I can get this in better focus. And we've got to run it for a considerable period of time so that as that water becomes a vapor, it's got to have time to be drawn out of the system. So they tell you to run for 10, 15, 20 minutes, something like that, as long as my air compressor can keep up. You need to keep around 90 psi to keep it going. What our gauges should read. So I've got 260 psi on the high side and about 32 on the low side. That means the air coming out of my outlet should be fairly cool. Nice and cool. Now I can drive the Rusty Grenade around in the summertime. Yay, Rusty! Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about AC stuff. I'm really happy with the way this turned out, but only time will tell how well it holds up. I think I got the right amount of oil in there to lubricate the compressor and so forth. So now it's time to take old Rusty out for a nice hot summer day cruise and see if I can keep my cool. Thanks for watching. Whoa, it's warm out here. I guess I don't need this anymore. Woo!